Hello, Bishop Kelly. This is Father Vance, your chaplain speaking. And I wanted to take a little bit of time today to reflect with you about Holy Week and especially about the celebrations coming up this weekend. And even as we are still apart in our social distancing and our isolation to try to get a handle on this coronavirus, we still need to be together in our prayer and in our spirituality. And so I wanted to talk just a few minutes today about the Triduum. The Triduum is the days between Thursday and Easter on Holy Week. And so we're coming up on those in just a couple of days. Behind me, you'll see one of my happy places. This is a valley in the South Island of New Zealand. And it was one of the locations for the movie The Lord of the Rings. And so I've been there twice in my life, and it's certainly one of my happy places. So anyway, I wanted to reflect with you just a little bit about these high holy days that we're approaching here in the next few days. So on Holy Thursday, the Catholic tradition is that there are no masses in the morning, and there are no masses during the day, and the only mass that we'll have is called the Mass of the Lord's Supper, and that's celebrated in the evening of Holy Thursday. And that's a very special Mass, and those of you who've been to it before will know that there are two primary celebrations in that Mass, and one of them is the washing of the feet, because we always read the Gospel where Jesus gathers his disciples in the upper room for the Last Supper and becomes their servant and washes their feet. And of course, Peter, go big or go home, Peter will say, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus will respond to him, unless I wash you, you have no fellowship with me. And then Peter will say, well, then don't wash just my feet, wash my entire body as well. And Jesus will say, for those who bathe, only their feet need washing. And so the first is a very, very profound lesson about service and about how we serve one another in Jesus' name. We serve one another because God has served us. And so that's the first kind of theme of that beautiful Mass. The second thing we celebrate on Holy Thursday is what we call in the Catholic Church the institution of the Eucharist. We celebrate the fact that the Last Supper, we believe, was the first Mass, and that at that first Mass, Jesus turned the bread and the wine of their Passover meal into his body and into his blood, and then gave them the commission to do the same, to do this in memory of me. And so in kind of Catholic imagination, that Last Supper is in effect the ordination of the apostles, the 11 apostles who stayed, with the exception of Judas Iscariot, the ordination as priests of those 11 apostles and their commission to do the same thing. And so on Holy Thursday, it's a beautiful evening Mass that celebrates service in the name of God who served us and celebrates the sacrament of the Eucharist. There's a beautiful thing that happens at the end of the Holy Thursday Mass. When everything is done, the altar is stripped bare. All the cloths are taken from the altar, and the tabernacle is empty. And so the Eucharist, that is usually reserved in the tabernacle, is taken out and is placed in another place. And in the church, the tabernacle doors remain open throughout Good Friday and until the Easter Saturday, the Saturday celebration. And that's a beautiful and also kind of a terrifying symbol for Catholics, because the first place that a Catholic looks whenever he or she goes into a Catholic church is for the tabernacle, with a little red candle burning beside the box in which the Eucharist is reposed. And a Catholic will always either bow or genuflect before that tabernacle when he or she enters a Catholic church. And so to leave that open is a reminder of the tragedy of Good Friday. Now we move to the celebrations, the liturgies of Good Friday. And on Good Friday, the most important thing is that there is no Mass. No Mass is celebrated anywhere in the Catholic world on Good Friday. And that is to commemorate and represent that that's the day on which Jesus died for us. That's the day on which the ultimate sacrifice for God's love was made by his son Jesus. And so no Mass is celebrated there. And it's a wonderful and also kind of a scary ability that we have to imagine what life would be like without God. And I think that's very applicable to us in these days of isolation. Is even though we're isolated from one another, even though we are significantly challenged, we have our faith. And through technology, we can connect with one another. And through our faith, we can connect at a very deep and profound level with each other. And on Good Friday, what we do is we read the Passion. We read the Passion of the Lord, which is the story of his trial and his death. And then we venerate the cross. And in churches around the world, you'll see different ways of venerating the crucifix. And usually everybody is given the opportunity to file up like they would at communion, to kiss or to bow before or to kneel before a representation of the crucifix with Jesus on the cross. And then thirdly, we share communion with one another, because on Holy Thursday, the night before, enough of the Eucharist would have been consecrated so that we could share communion with one another. But it's not a Mass, it's a communion service. And that's a profound symbol in the Catholic Church, that on Good Friday, there is no Mass celebrated. And so that Good Friday service is kind of an empty feeling day, and it's supposed to be. And then we wait with Jesus, who after his crucifixion was buried in the tomb, and we wait until the Easter Vigil, which is supposed to happen on the evening of Holy Saturday, and the night before Easter. It's called the Vigil because it's the night before Easter morning. And that vigil is the most beautiful and the most elaborate and probably the longest celebration in the Catholic world. And there are readings after readings after readings, because the purpose of the Easter Vigil is to remember the whole progress of history of God's relationship with his people. And so we read from the Old Testament, we read about the covenant, and we read about the betrayal of the covenant by the Jewish people, and God continually offering them a new covenant, continually offering them to be faithful again to the covenant. And then that shifts to the offering of God's only begotten Son in Jesus, and the definitive and unrepeatable salvation that God wins for us by sending his Son, both to die and to rise from the dead, so that we can have hope in the resurrection ourselves. And so it takes a while. In one of my favorite things, The Lord of the Rings, there's a race called the Ents. And the Ents are tree people. And one of the things the Ents say is that we don't say anything unless it's worth taking a long time to say. And I always think about that as I listen to and participate in the Easter Vigil Mass, because we take our time in reading and reflecting and participating in the whole history of the relationship of God with his people, from the very beginning of time to this very moment, tonight at the Easter Vigil. And so that's the first part. And then we also, at that Mass, we welcome new members into the church. So those who have been preparing through the rite of Christian initiation of adults, those who have come to the church to be baptized, those who have come to the church to make their profession of faith and to be confirmed, are welcomed into the church. And it's a wonderful celebration as well. It's a long Mass, but it starts in darkness. It starts with the Easter fire and the lighting of the Easter candle. And then usually everybody in the congregation has a candle that they'll be lit, that they will light in a darkened church. And that's a great symbolism of how the one light of Christ scatters the darkness by being shared by the people. And then the whole history of the readings and the welcoming of the new Catholics into the church. And there's a moment where we turn on all the lights and ring the bells and sing a song of God's glory. And it's a wonderful, wonderful celebration after this kind of darkness and the penance of Lent. It's a wonderful celebration that moves us into the celebration of Easter and of the resurrection. And so what I would really hope that we could all do is participate in some way in those masses, in those liturgies, in those public celebrations of the church. And you can do that by the streaming that happens in your local parish. And all you have to do is go to the website of your local parish to find out what the times and how to get on those streaming. And I know also Bishop Peter will be participating in those masses and those celebrations and streaming those from the cathedral. And go to the diocesan website, the Diocese of Boise website, and to discover how you can participate in those too. But because we can't be physically in each other's presence, I think it's even more important that we are spiritually in each other's presence. And if the technology can help us to be present to one another spiritually, then let's use it to be present to one another spiritually. And so my prayer for this community is that we can find a way to celebrate the great blessing and the great joy of the celebration of Easter, even though we can't be together. And my prayers are for you and with you, and for all those who are fighting this pandemic, for all those who are putting their lives on the line, for all those who have succumbed to the virus, especially for those who have died, and especially for those who have had to die alone without their loved ones close to them. We lift them up to God, and we lift them up and commend them to God's great mercy and great love that we will celebrate this Easter Sunday with the resurrection of Jesus. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, we have justification to hope for our own resurrection. And so my prayer for us is that we can be people of the resurrection, people of the joy of Easter, even in the midst of the challenges that life sometimes throws at us. So may God bless us all, and a very joyous and happy Easter to all of us here at Bishop Keller. God bless.